Welcome to this week's episode of the Thinking Podcast, and this is your host, Jeffrey Wu. I'm really excited to be talking to Neil Harbisson, who's been recognized as the world's first cyborg, and you might have seen his talks and presentation on TED and in different media outlets over the past, 10 plus years now. So welcome to this show.
Thank you.
So where are you? Looks like you're in some sort of studio, laboratory. You were mentioning before you were going live, a bunker.
Yeah,
Can
we
you describe your situation?
So it's a secret location in Barcelona under. So you need to go down some stairs to get here, and then we do some things here. Just a few hours ago, we were having some implants, so there's a bit of blood on because we do the surgery on the piano. So this is actually a piano.
Wow.
But we use it as a as a bed and as a surgery table.
how's the cleanliness and the
No, it's very
sterility?
We clean it
So
a lot like Dexter. Have you seen Dexter? How clean
Yes.
everything. So we use a lot of plastic, and then we do the things, and then we remove it. So
Okay.
it's very clean. Yes.
Interesting. So who got implanted and what was implanted in
Well,
this
today
afternoon?
we did a transplant. We transplanted a chip from one place to another. So it was actually
Okay.
transplanting a chip from a place to another, basically.
Yeah. So I'm curious about your story getting into really, I think just kicking off a serious inquiry into the notion of being a cyborg. I think it's been a part of science fiction for, at least, decades. But I think there wasn't a serious inquiry of people actually trying to become cyborgs until I think you started experimenting over a decade ago. And looking a little back into the story, you had like an art project where I guess you're colorblind and you were seeing if you could create a sensor that could allow you to perceive color through sound. And then that brought you to a full journey where this became a permanent fixture that has not only just sort of recovered color perception, but also increased your senses beyond what is typically associated with humans. Can you walk through that journey and how you got started along this path?
Yeah, I guess it became as I was always curious about color, and also I wanted to have a way. I wanted to sense color, but I didn't want to change my sight. So I didn't want to create any type of element that would alter my vision, because to me, seeing in grayscale has many advantages. I have better night vision. I can see longer distances. I memorize shapes more easily. So there's many advantages of seeing in grayscale. So my aim was never to actually change my sight. I wanted to sense color, and to do that, I wanted to create a new sensory input, basically, that would not be altering any of my existing senses. So I didn't want to use headphones, I didn't want to use electronic glasses, and also I didn't want to wear technology, because I found that it would be uncomfortable to wear a sense.
Right.
So I wanted to create a new organ, a sensory organ, to have a new sense, basically. So that was the aim. And then first of all, I tried to think of how to sense color. And there's been many theories through history relating color and sound, because they're both frequencies. So the aim was to create some system that would allow me to feel color through the frequencies of light. And then I needed a new organ. So I looked at nature, and I thought that an antenna would be one of the best organs to have, because it's 360 degrees. So you can be pointing somewhere else when your senses are focusing somewhere else. So I wanted to have an antenna, to create an antenna implant so that I would sense color independently from my existing senses. And that's how it all started in 2003.
Wow. And now it's expanded beyond just sensing color, right? Like, what are the latest capabilities of your antenna?
Yeah, so I sense from infrareds to ultraviolets, from near infrared to near ultraviolet. And then there's also internet connection, so I can receive colors not from the antenna, but from external sensors. So people can send colors directly to my head using a mobile phone, or I can connect to satellites, and then I can sense the colors from space. So the internet as a sense allows me to separate my body from my sense of color, and then I can be here, but my sense of color can be in space. So I like
Right.
exploring this experience of separating my body from my senses.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think in computing, so my background is a computer scientist, and you have distributed sensors, right? Like that's very normal for a computer to have sensors that collect input and it comes into the central, in a CPU or something. You're applying that to biology, where you have, a, I guess, a light frequency detector sensor that's in space that's transmitting to your, I guess, your local receiver.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. This is not
yeah,
AI, it's
right.
AS. So it's not artificial intelligence, it's artificial senses. And that's what I also was very clear from the beginning that I didn't want to know the colors of things. If the antenna was telling me the names of colors, that would be AI. And I was not interested in AI. I wanted to sense and experience colors. So that's why
Yeah.
at the Cyber Foundation, what we do is AS, so cybernetic, artificial senses, not
Yeah.
intelligence.
It makes sense, right? Because like if you're colorblind, like the notion that the word of purple or blue or red has no meaning to you, right? These are just like concepts that we apply towards senses. So you're essentially so yeah, like just by telling you, hey, purple, 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 when you're like looking at something that's purple is meaningless. But
Exactly.
actually sensing and feeling it, I mean that you're developing some intuition around what purple feels like. Or like that's something that we get or someone with a normal color vision would just naturally perceive. You're recovering that intuitive sense of color.
Yes, and we are all colorblind because it depends on which species you compare yourself with. So,
Good point.
from infrareds are colors that exist, but our species does not sense. But we could all sense through antennas, for example, or any other way of sensing these colors. So, it's a bit yeah. There's a lot that we cannot sense that we could sense if we just merge with technology and add new senses. So I think
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. It's very anthropocentric to say, hey, this is the visible color spectrum. It's a very narrow spectrum of electromagnetic radiation is what we consider color. But yeah, I know there's fish that have four rods that you can theoretically detect an extra dimension of color, right? Like that would be interesting. So bring it down to a more practical point. So do you have any interesting anecdotes where you're picking up senses from with your antenna that unaugmented people don't realize? Like, do you have do you have a superhuman super sense story where you're like walking down the street and you're like picking up something that no one else around you picks up?
um, well, the infrared allows me to detect if alarms are, well, movement detectors are on or off, and in most cases, these sensors are used for alarms,
Huh.
and in many cases they are off, and I can tell if it's fake or not. The movement. So
That's
many
cool.
shops are fake, and or they're not working. So that's I can
That's a
easily
cool.
or
That's
a
a cool
remote control.
superpower.
If it's the remote control that is not working, or if it's the television, I can tell also by hearing if there's infrared or not. Um,
Coming out of the remote. That's
yeah.
cool. What
Um,
else? What else? Yeah. What else is sort of unintuitively there? So I guess you're picking up infrared. So yeah, like motion detectors, remote controls are infrared driven. Anything that uses ultraviolet, or why have you considered expanding into like X-rays or gamma radiation, or is that just too
so
noisy?
to keep extending, but then it
Right.
always detects the dominant color. So in order to hear it, it would have to be the dominant color around
I
me.
see.
So if there's a lot of ultraviolet, then I will hear the ultraviolet. If I go beyond, it will always, I think, be based on the dominant. But yes,
Right.
relative. Um, Otherwise, yeah, at some point I would only hear ultraviolet during the day if it
Yeah.
was because ultraviolet sometimes everywhere. If it's
Yeah.
so, yeah, you need to choose. You're in Barcelona. There's still a lot of things going on outside. A bit of I don't know if you.
Yeah, no, I mean, if we've been following the news, yeah, recent tragedy there. So I hope everything is okay in Barcelona.
Yeah, it's slowly recovering. People are.
Okay, yeah. Um, so it seems like, what are other external senses that you've seen have become interesting or you're looking into? I know uh, one of your collaborators has sensors in her elbow that detects earthquakes. Um, what other interesting senses
Well,
have you
Moon
worked
will
with or come
contribute
across?
to moonquakes. So Moon will be
Yeah.
sensing moonquakes now permanently from September 15th. So she will feel these vibrations on her foot. So
Right.
whenever the moon vibrates, her foot will vibrate. So instead
Hmm.
of physically going to the moon will come to her feet. So that's,
Interesting.
I guess, a new way of exploring space.
Right.
Um, Also, I'm creating an organ for the sense of time with Orion in New York. It's gonna be circular, and it's gonna give me a point of heat that will slowly go around my head, and it will be inside the between the skin and the bone. So I will
Hmm.
feel the sun going around the head. It will take 24 hours. So it's gonna be like having a solar clock inside my head. So feeling the heat here means that if I feel the heat here, it means it's 12 o'clock in London.
Noon.
That will be
Okay.
zero. Then if
Yeah.
you go, that's more Iceland, and then you go to the Atlantic. This will be the United States. So I will feel the sun position, and then this will allow me to have an organ for the sense of time. So if I have this for several years, I want to see if I can alter my perception of time. If I want the situation to last longer, I'll program the heat to go a bit slower to see if my brain thinks that time is going a bit slower or faster. So it's taking Einstein's theory of time
Huh. Time dilation.
into practice to see if we can alter our perception of time if we have an organ for time. We should, in theory, because we have eyes for sight and we can create optical illusions. I'm sure we can create time illusions if we have an organ for the sense of time. So that's my
Interesting. That's interesting. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, would you imagine you'd be putting yourself into like a black box where that time sensing organ is dominant? I mean, how would you? I'm curious. How would you imagine setting that experiment up?
well, we are here in um, under. There's no window,
Underground.
so there's
Okay.
no way of me knowing what time. There's no clocks either in this space. So I will be uh, in here in this bunker for some days or weeks, if I can be for some weeks, so that I can have a full experience with my solar crown.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How is that gonna? I mean, that seems like a pretty interesting operation and implant. I mean, can you share a little bit of more details around how that exactly is gonna work?
What a prototype is, but it's basically a silicon with a heat reactor that will slowly allow me to feel the circulation. First, it will be permanently outside for a few months, so that my
Okay.
also to test that it doesn't burn. It doesn't, but it's a bit complex because it needs a two thermometers, one to detect the heat outside and one to detect the heat of my body. Otherwise, I would either get burned depending on the temperature, or I would not
Not
feel
feel
it.
it.
So
Yeah.
it's a bit complex to create it. And that's why it's taking more than a year to design it, and it's
I
almost
see. That
done.
makes sense. Interesting. So I'm actually curious. So it seems like with a lot of your efforts, you've been focused on external or artificial senses, and a lot of folks in our biohacking community around, uh, especially people that are trying to manage their metabolic syndromes, are very much in terms of are interested in understanding and quantifying their internal uh, metabolic state, right? Like I was mentioning before, a lot of people sort of have quasi implants with continuous blood glucose monitors, or understanding their metabolic panels. And there's a lot of interesting research in Silicon Valley of having a continuous measure of receiving, their glucose or blood ketone levels as it evolves through the day in terms of in response to eating or fasting and everything that you do normally. Have you looked into any of that sort of internal sensing, or what are your thoughts in that realm?
Um, yeah, I don't know. I'm more interested in
External.
well, I see it as an input. So
Right.
using technology to receive things that my body cannot sense.
Right.
That's what I'm really interested in. But I
Yeah.
understand the interest also in knowing how our body works. Um,
Or,
but
but I think it's also like a new sense, right? Like it's like just as much of a sixth sense if we just now have a quantitative understanding of okay, like this is uh, what my glucose levels are, this is what my ketones levels are, this is what my lactate levels are.
no, a sense is stimuli from the outside that comes into our body. That would be a sense. Receiving
Well, I
stimuli from the outside, wouldn't it?
well, I would say like you can feel things inside, right? Like there's a sense of uh, pain coming from internally, right? I would say like if you go from the broadest perspective, like it's a new input channel of you know, I guess it's like our brains themselves are just sensory, a sensory node, and there are things that it can detect from the outside or inside our body, but they're just still inputs into the brain. If you see what I'm saying.
Um, Not fully, but yes, I think there's a difference between also because we have like not five or six senses. We have many senses, like
Right.
sense of time, the sense of um, humor, even.
Yeah.
So there's many ways of defining sense in a broad way,
Yeah.
or you can simplify it with the five sensory organs or six sensory organs, which is
Sure.
there's maybe not more detected. There's maybe six sensory organs, and which are based on receiving stimuli from the outside
Right.
and then processing them. And that's the part that I'm mostly interested in. I
Yeah.
find there's so much that we cannot sense from the outside that
Yeah.
that would change the way we perceive reality. I don't know if
Absolutely.
my
Yeah.
sugar levels would change my sense of. I'm sure it's interesting, but I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think it's a. I don't think there's a.
No,
Sort
there's
of a
no
an
clash.
argument over, or I wouldn't say there's like a hierarchy of value or anything. I think it's just like it's interesting that there's broad groups of people interested in increasing capabilities of humans, right? Like, yeah, you can talk about externals, or you can make a bifurcation between external inputs or inputs coming in from the body. But yes, I would say that like we all intuitively feel like when you're like eating a high sugar meal or when you're like cranky in the afternoon because you're low on blood sugar, we intuitively feel that, right? Just in our mood and how our body moves. But I guess it's like sort of the biohacker in our sense is really saying, okay, let's quantify that and how do we understand that and potentially manipulate that for better performance of the day. But yes, I mean I think absolutely understand from your focus is like how do we add new external stimuli sensors to do things that normal people or like unaugmented people won't be able to do. I'm curious um, in the sense of describing yourself as an artist. So, did you always have a artistic aesthetic? As you ventured into the space. I mean, it seems like there's some segment of what you're doing is performance art in some sense, right? And some aspect is really, I presume, thinking that this is the future of humanity. Um, how do you navigate sort of these different tensions?
I see this as art, the creation of this, and this is an artwork, but it's inside my body. The creation of the sense is an artwork, but it's inside my mind. So it's, for me, the creation of a new sense is an art itself. The creation of an organ is an art itself, and the design of your perception of reality is an art. So I call this cyborg art because I think it's an art itself, and I think we'll see many more artists that will create new senses and new organs and will design their perception of reality, and that will be their art. The issue with cyborg art is that the artist is the only one experiencing this art. So I'm the only
Right.
one experiencing the vibrations inside my head. So
Right.
it's a bit of a post art because it breaks the tradition of art, which in the tradition of art is the artist the audience and a space to perform. In this case, I'm the artist, I am the audience, the only audience of this art,
Right.
and I am also the space where it's happening. So it breaks with the tradition of art. So it might be seen in the future as post art, and will
Interesting.
many more people, or perceptionism, because the aim is perception, and you cannot really sell perception. So it also breaks with art because it's an art form that only the artist can experience inside the mind or the
Right.
body.
That's an interesting way to look at it. Then when you're giving presentations and talks, there's definitely a performance to the meta audience, if you will, right? Like, yes, I do not perceive your your sensations around your specific art, but we do see the like we meta see like the composition with the artist, the art, the space, and the audience in you. So there's like different sort of layers to what we're viewing, right? Like in some sense, when you're on stage presenting your work, you're also an artist in that level, right?
Yeah, I guess the only way I can share the art that I'm experiencing is by explaining my experiences to an audience.
Right,
There's no other way of actually sharing it. I've done paintings and I've done some color concerts that can, in a way, reveal part of this experience, but the actual art is in here. So it's
right,
impossible for me to share
right.
in the way I'm experiencing it.
Yeah,
As you have an antenna implanted in your head. That would be
right,
the closest thing to experiencing this art. But yeah, this artwork, whenever I die, will be whenever, I mean, the same way that you can have organs that are donated when you die, this will be in the list of organs to be donated. So any other artist or person will be, I guess, willing to have it implanted in the head. So the artwork will continue in the body
interesting.
of someone else.
That's a cool way to look at it. Um, I mean, it seems like, in one sense, that synesthetics, people that sort of perceive color as sound. What is your interaction with people that have synesthesia? Is it how's that conversation like? So synesthesia, for people that don't know, is sort of like the people that can pick up. They claim they can hear colors or see colors that ascribe to music.
Yeah, I say that I hear colors to simplify it, but I'm actually feeling a vibration inside my bone that then
Right.
becomes an inner sound. So it's different from my sense of hearing. To me,
Right.
hearing is through the ears. This
Right.
is a new sense, but the closest is hearing, because I can actually hear, as a secondary effect of the vibrations, an inner sound. But if I was completely deaf, I could still perceive color, and if I was completely blind as well. So it's an independent sense. I don't need to hear or to see to sense color. So
Right.
it's difficult to compare. But and in synesthesia, it's the union of existing senses. In this case, it's the creation of a new one. But yeah, the closest would be people who can hear sounds as
Right.
color, or who when they look at the color, they hear some sounds. And
Right.
I've met some people, but the sounds that they hear do not match the physical sound of a color. So if we could hear red, hypothetically, we could hear the frequency of light. Red
Right.
would be a note between F and F sharp. And I've never met yet synesthete, someone with synesthesia that has the same scale as the frequencies of light.
Right. Which makes sense. I mean, I think yours is, yeah, there's like a very mathematical notion of your how you're picking up in amplifying sound, right, or colors into vibration. Where, yeah, it just like it is relatively unknown how synesthetics are actually perceiving their sense, right? Like there's, the skeptic in me is sometimes saying, are they making it up? Like, is something just misfiring? It's hard to tell. Where I think in your case, there's actually a vibration that's calibrated to, as you're saying, the frequency of light. So it's like a very mathematical notion of what your sense is doing.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
some doctors say that we are all born with one sense, which is all of them together, and then from the moment we are born, our brain starts separating these
Right.
sensory inputs, and some people don't separate them completely, so they might have vision and sound quite together, and
Hmm.
then these people have some connections with sound and vision.
Right.
So I think they're not making it up. I think it's true that some people might some senses quite together,
Intertwined. Yeah.
but they never really match the frequencies, mathematical transposition of light to sound. I've never met anyone with this.
Interesting. So I think since you've, you know, have it in antenna since I guess 2003, it seems like more and more people are starting to experiment and become cyborgs. I'm curious, um, you know, how large is the collective and how is the movement, if you call it a movement, how do you see this growing?
Yeah, see, it will definitely be an art movement because now that I've met many artists that they've at least created the prototype and they've worn the sense. And in one case, since last 2 weeks ago, he already has it installed, which is Manel Munoz, an artist that has a way of sensing the atmospheric pressure changes. So he
Hmm.
feels if the pressure is going up or down. So this allows him to predict if it's going to rain. Also, it allows him to feel his altitude. So now he's
Interesting.
the mountains and he's actually experiencing his new sense and he's enjoying this and he will create, well, he sees this as an art itself, the creation of this sense, but he can also then create maybe external artworks. He's a photographer, so it might change his type of photography. Yeah, I think in the 2020s is the decade when we will see this becoming more common and more normalized. Now there's some people around the world doing some experiments, and we've been doing giving a lot of workshops in art schools as well, and there's an interest. But eventually there should be a career or a degree on the creation of sensors, so senses design or
Right.
species design, designing what species you want to be, what organs and senses you want to have. So I
Right.
think it will be or a cyborg art degree specializing in the creation of senses and organs. Sooner or later, I'm sure there'll be a university with this speciality.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. So I agree with you that at some point everyone will be a cyborg to some level, and I think there's a couple. I'm curious to see how you think the future will play out. Uh, there's one painting of the future where everyone is sort of like this androgynous. Everyone has like the same implants, same capabilities. Or I think what is seems to be more likely to how I see the future unfolding is that there's going to be more and more diversity with people implanting all different types of sensors. I'm curious as you project out, yeah, 2020, 2030. How do you see the world unfolding? Like, do you see everyone on the street with antennas and air pressure gauges and uh, paint 2030 for us?
Well, I think diversity will be much greater. So what we now call diversity is nothing compared to what we will call diversity in 10 or 20 years. People will have their own senses and organs. So that's something we need to prepare ourselves with, that we will meet someone and this person might have a sense that you don't have or an organ that you don't have. And I think many people will start identifying themselves as transspecies, which is the addition of senses and organs that are not traditionally human. In this case, this is a transspecies implant, the surgery was a transspecies surgery. That's how I define it, because it's the addition of an organ that is not human,
Hmm.
an antenna, and the addition of senses that are not traditionally human, ultraviolet and infrared perception. So in this case, it's adding senses and organs that are traditional for other species. An antenna, there's many insects that have antennas, or infrared and ultraviolet perception is completely normal for other species. So I think we'll see many people adding senses and organs that might be normal for other species, but that not traditionally human, and
Right.
also senses that are entirely new.
Yeah. I think it's like I think that's that makes a lot of sense. Where I think today's sort of tribal collections are based on we all have the same senses more or less, and people are dividing up on either political beliefs or skin color or where their ancestors' origins came from. But it could be interesting if you start seeing sort of people binding together. But I guess you already see that people are binding together on shared interests, uh, shared political goals or shared sociological goals. And what you're seeming to imply is that people will start bonding around shared sensory experiences. So would you imagine that there'd be a group of people with antennas, like all sort of having affinity towards each other? Is that what you're sort of seeing, or
Maybe there will be like families that will have a specific sense, yes, because eventually these senses will be inherited. In my case, we don't know if I have a child, because my brain has changed. If I had a child, maybe the this sense would be inherited without the technology. But also when this stops becoming,
so you're saying like some epigenetic thing is happening in your brain that might pass
yes,
some characteristics
when
on.
we stop using technology as well, when you start adding these senses by genetically modifying ourselves or
Right.
by implanting antennas that are made from our own DNA. So when we can 3D print organs with our own DNA, new organs, and add senses by modifying our genes, then if this person with these new senses and organs wants to have a child, we don't
Right.
know if these new senses or organs will be dominant and a child can be born with an antenna or with a new sense because of
Right.
the genetical changes. So we are in the renaissance of our species, the
Yeah.
beginning of a huge change, and some people are aware of it, others are not. But it's to me, it's very clear that it's happening.
Yeah.
Once,
And absolutely, I think we should be having more and more of these conversations, because it is going to happen, right? Like there will be more people implanting for advantage, or for sort of recovering a deficiency. More and more people will definitely do it. I'm curious that to oh
we all need, yes. I think deficiency, but it's that we still cannot survive in this planet. That's we've been changing this planet in order to survive. The philosophy, I think, of a cyborg should be that we should change ourselves in order to survive in this planet, not the planet. In this case, now we are using artificial light because we have no night vision. So
right.
if we had night vision, we wouldn't have to change the planet. We wouldn't have to create or waste energy to see at night. So I think slowly society will see that we need to change ourselves instead of changing the planet. Instead of using heaters and air conditioning, we should be able to regulate our temperature. So that's, I think, one of the social aspects that I think also will give more um, sense. It will make more sense to become a cyborg if you want to stop changing the planet and start changing yourself.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? It's a lot more efficient energy wise to manipulate ourselves rather than change like this huge space around us. Yeah, I'm actually curious in terms of opening up potential an ethical can of worms. When you have children, are you going to give them antennas, or is it going to be up to them? How do you, if you thought about it, how would you navigate that?
Yeah, I would never force anyone to have an antenna. No, so it should be their own anyone's decision.
Right. Okay.
One's own decision to have what senses and organs one wants to have. Yes, I would not influence this. But if this was genetically added, so if I added the infrared and ultraviolet perception genetically, and
Right.
I implanted this antenna by 3D printing it with my own DNA, we don't know if I had a child, if this child would be born with the genetical changes that I made to myself. So
Right.
that's that in a few decades, maybe in the end of this century, children will be born with new senses and organs because the parents genetically modified themselves. So, and then if they decide to have children, these new children will be born with these new
Yeah.
senses.
Yeah. I mean, I think you already see this happening for as a therapeutic. I think there was the first CRISPRed human embryo just recently. So there are genetically modified humans, and these are more designed for as a therapy, right? Like recovering some sort of disease. But then I think you make a great point. We're all deficient in some ways, right? Like what is even the norm of like what is even normal, right? It's like a cultural artifact of normalcy. So maybe like that is going to be very fuzzy as people sort of redefine what normal is. So people, maybe will be CRISPRing their kids. Like that isn't going to be that wouldn't surprise me at all.
Well, if you define yourself as trans species, then normality is much wider because that if you compare yourself with other species, many,
Yep.
many things are normal. Having an antenna is normal. Seeing in black and white is normal. sensing ultraviolet and infrared is normal. So
Right.
many things will be normal if we define ourselves as a species, not as human. So I think I feel very comfortable define myself as a trans species because I'm
Interesting. Interesting. So does that mean you have more of an affinity towards animals?
yeah.
I'm okay. Interesting. So, like, I don't know. Are you vegan? Do you not eat animals? I'm actually curious how that applies into like a day to day.
As a teenager, I've never liked eating other species. So, but
Wow. Okay.
since since I sense infrared and ultraviolet, I feel also much more connected to these species that sense these colors because we now share a sense. So if I see an animal staring at a wall and I sense there's infrared in that wall, I'm sure that the animal is staring at the infrared, not at the wall. So I share an experience with other species that I didn't before. So the more senses we add, the more we can connect with other species, not with machines. I think many people think that becoming a cyborg brings me closer to a machine, but I feel like it makes me feel much closer to nature and to other animal species.
I think that's a great way to look at it. No, it's interesting. I mean, so in terms of like fellow antenna species, do you feel more affinity to bugs and traditionally creepy things then?
Yeah, some people shout at me, what's the name of that fish? There's anglerfish. They call
Yeah.
me anglerfish as trying to, I guess, insult me, but it actually, I don't feel it's a bad thing to be close to a fish. I do have some organs that are now very traditional for other species. Yes, antennas. If I see an insect with an antenna, I feel, yeah, a closer connection than I did before. Yes.
That's really cool. I think um I might I like I've been thinking about like factory farming and our treatment of other species as a human society, and it is like pretty brutal, and you can imagine in 100 200 years, if we're 3D printing all of our food, etc., that we would look back on factory farming practices of essentially enslaving cattle and pigs and chicken and putting them in a small box and having them breed and pump out their children and eat them and kill their children, and like as a pretty unethical practice that today uh, is commonplace. So absolutely, I think that kind of broader thinking across species as opposed to just being very human centric is I think what the future will kind of look like. I mean, I'm actually curious. I mean, I appreciate that you actually kind of live to that standard where like you don't eat other animals. Because I think for me, like I think about it as a moral problem, but like I'll still I'll still partake in eating them. Haven't gotten around to uh, overcoming that hypocrisy. So appreciate that you actually believe it and actually carry it through in your everyday living.
Well, I hope you do it as well. I don't know. I'm not good at convincing, but I think you shouldn't eat other species. You'll feel better.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Absolutely. I'm curious in terms of mortality. Um, have you thought? I mean, as we're developing more and more um, capability to alter ourselves, what do you think of the notion of enhancing our longevity? Um, would you want to live forever? I'm curious if you have any thoughts or
Yeah, I think
philosophy around that.
focusing on making your body live longer,
Right.
but I'll be working on different way, which is to instead of making my body live longer, I want my brain to believe that I've lived longer. So that's why I've created the sense of time. If you can create an optical illusion because you have eyes, you can also create a time illusion and if you have an organ for time. So you could potentially make your brain believe that you've lived 200 years. If you
Right.
have an organ for the sense of time and you make time go faster or slower, you could sense that you've lived 200 years. And in this way, you don't need to make any physical changes. So that's what I'll be testing. Once I have the sense of time, I will not only be able to make a situation last longer or shorter, I will also, in the long term, uh, be able to change my sense of age in theory. So that's a way of living longer is either to make your body live longer or fool your brain, which is what I'm gonna try to do.
Interesting. And at some point you should experiment with turning it backwards. See if you just like your brain freaks out. It's like, oh, I'm going back in time.
I could try that as well, yes. But that so my brain needs to get really used to the fact this one first. So I'll have
Right,
it
right,
in
right, right, right. Yeah,
normal rotation, so
yeah,
24 hours for many years, I think, at least 2 or 3 years, so that my brain feels this is reality, and
yeah.
then I'll start doing little
Tweaks.
slight changes.
Yeah,
Maybe an hour might last a bit more, a bit less, or 5 minutes will last six. So to see if I can actually feel the time is
right,
stretching or not.
right. Yeah. Is there anything else in terms of, you know, it sounds like that's like one of the big projects. Any other exciting cyborg projects that you're personally excited about that you want to share?
Moon and I created the transdental communication system a couple of years ago, and we are perfectionizing it. It's so I have some spaces here, no tooth, so
Ooh.
I have space to create new implants. So we created two teeth, one in Moon's mouth and one in my mouth. That whenever I click, Moon receives a vibration in her mouth, and whenever
Huh.
she clicks, I receive a vibration. And so we both know the Morse code. So depending on the the rhythm, we can actually send words to each other, and we call this the transcendental communication system. It works with Bluetooth, so it sends the vibration to your mobile phone, from your mobile phone to wherever she is, and then she receives it from a mobile phone to the tooth. So it works through Bluetooth. So it's a Bluetooth tooth that allows you to communicate from mouth to mouth,
That's
and
awesome.
it is a communication system that would work in space because there's no air there, or it would work under the water.
Right.
And we've experimented it. We have it as it can be installed in the tooth now, but we're trying to make it as an implant so it can be permanently implanted. But there's issues with the battery because now we're using the battery as under the
The
here
roof of the mouth.
way
Okay.
of speaking was a bit different. So we're trying to make the battery system. Maybe it will charge by clicking as well.
Right.
We have to maybe brushing our tooth will while brushing it we can charge it. So we're trying to find a way of charging the tooth.
Interesting. Great. This is a fascinating discussion. I want to be respectful of everyone's time here. So, how does our community learn more about your work and follow the progress? I think the time dilation experiment sounds very interesting. How do we and all the listeners keep in touch?
I don't know because I'm not on Facebook or Instagram since January the 1st. So I'm a bit, but I don't know. I don't know how what they could do.
All right, so then I guess we'll have to reschedule. In the next. uh, yeah, we'll coordinate and get an update as you progress. I mean, people I think will be interested in following.
Yeah. I'll be online again on January the 1st, on 2018.
Okay.
So by then I have Facebook and Instagram. That I usually post things there. But this year I'm offline.
Why? Just to unplug for a little bit.
Um, yeah, because just this year I decided I would be offline for a long list of reasons, but I'll be back online in 2018
Awesome.
if
I
I'm alive.
appreciate the work you're doing, and it's edgy. It's pushing the limits of humanity, and I think we need more and more people that are pushing the extent of humans. I mean, I think there's too many people. I think sort of happy with the status quo. So keep being you. I mean, it's awesome.
Thank
Um, yeah, let's stay in touch. I mean, I'm super curious to see how your experiments and hash out and help spread the message here. So we'll talk again soon.
Okay.
Thanks, Neil.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, Neil is a character. That was a fun guest to talk to. Thanks, Zil, for bringing him on our show. As always, follow us on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Google Play, and SoundCloud. Shoot us some questions. Sounds like Neil will be offline for the next few months, but we'll definitely keep in touch and update you on the progress. I think he's doing a lot of interesting, edgy, somewhat crazy stuff. But hey, like that's what innovation. That's what innovation. That's how innovation happens, right? You got to have people pushing what's the limits. Thanks so much. See you guys next time.